My name is Gabriel Raam, and this is the 7th verse of the Book of the Tao by Lao Tse, read by me and interpreted by me, according to the perception of the fifth way. I believe that when you watch this video, you will have on the screen or below a link to the fifth way site where you can get more understanding and knowledge of what it is. Heaven and earth last forever. Why do heaven and earth last forever? They are unborn, so ever living. The sage stays behind, thus he is ahead. He is detached, thus at one with all. Through selfless action he attains fulfillment. I will read it twice. Heaven and earth last forever. Why do heaven and earth last forever? They are unborn, so ever living. The sage stays behind, thus he is ahead. He is detached, thus at one with all. Through selfless action, he attains fulfillment. Okay, so as I said in the interpretation of the verses before, Lao Tse writing riddles. It's partially poetic, which means it's a direct flow from a soul perception, and partly it is conscious understanding, which is the adding up and the wisdom of the man about life. The poetic aspect comes from the soul, the philosophical aspect comes from the conscious perception. And obviously man that writes on such a high level in a poetic philosophical way, he's on a very high level himself because he is in touch with his soul and his consciousness is awake, is in an awake state. It's interesting to view philosophers through the gestalt of the mix between poetry and philosophy. I think Nietzsche writes in poetic philosophy, definitely in Das sprach Zarathustra, Søren Kierkegaard, and I'm sure there are more. If I'm not mistaken, Heidegger also has that, but I'm not certain. Now, I prefer to do this interpretation through a dialogue. I sit here with Danny. Danny, do you have anything you want to say to either start me off or to comment or...
Yes. First of all, I'm surprised whenever people make statements that they cannot explain, I don't know, logically or rationally. When he says that heaven and earth last forever, and they last forever because they are unborn, well, something inside me screams, how do you know it? How do you know it to be so? What are you trying to say?
Well, let me start by relating to how do you know. I don't think it's the right answer, the right question. Because when you say to someone, how do you know, it's a disguise from an objection.
Yes.
Because basically, no one needs to tell you how he knows. I mean, a chef that invites you, that cooks a dinner for you, doesn't have to take you to the kitchen to show you how he prepared it before you eat it.
Yes.
You trust that he is a chef. The same with an architect. You don't ask the architect, well, show me how do you know that this is the right structure. He will tell you, listen, I studied for many years and this is the best I can do. So we should take Lao Tse as a wise man.
Okay.
And the question is, if we start a dialogue, is what causes in you an objection? And in that, I must say that it's not good to read these verses with an emotional approach, taking it personally,
Yes.
by identifying with something that makes you feel good psychologically or makes you feel bad.
I understand.
You should come to it as neutral as possible, letting it enter into your system. Now, it being very concentrated truth is being rejected by a subjective stance that you take towards it.
I understand.
It bounces back. You should step to one side, which is exactly what he is talking about later on when he's speaking about being detached.
Yes.
But we will come to it. So, if you started it off, what is your objection about heaven and earth last forever? And why do they last forever? Because they are unborn.
So there is something incomprehensible in this.
I don't think the fact that it's incomprehensible causes an objection. See, it's very important that the reader will come unbiased, undetached, with no conditions. And whatever is being said, he should be open to it.
I understand.
If it's written to it that fishes are blue and they fly like birds, say, okay, that sounds interesting. Let's look at it.
Yes.
Give it a chance.
I understand.
Don't block it. A person, when he wants to perceive something, he should locate himself at the back of himself, allowing things to come in without interfering.
I understand.
He shouldn't be the doorkeeper. He should be the master sitting in the back room.
Yes.
So what's the problem? Heaven and earth last forever. Why do they last forever? Because they're unborn. What's the problem that you have with this sentence?
If I have located the emotional trigger for this, and it's telling me actually that I was born, and therefore I will die.
So you're saying like a little kid, why they last forever, heaven and earth? Why not me?
Yes.
Huh? It's not fair.
Yes.
Is that it?
I think so.
Okay, well, I think it's impossible to study truth and wisdom if a person puts himself in the picture. I think it's a precondition. It's fascinating what is happening here, because this is exactly where he is leading this verse, and I will read the second part of the verse, because the first part is to do with heaven and earth, but the second verse is exactly what he is saying the sage is doing, which you and a lot of readers are not doing. Now, what he's saying the sage stays behind, thus he is ahead. Now, he's not saying how come. It's missing, but it's there. So let me put a word which is not there to explain the flow. The sage stays behind, thus he is ahead. How he is doing that? Well, he is detached. Thus, he is one with all. Through selfless action, he attains fulfillment. So, basically, when you hear things about life, immediately you say to yourself, well, does it mean that my life is good or bad? Before you even understand what's being said, you identify and you attach yourself to an aspect which causes you to feel good or bad about life. We are addicted to wanting to have a good life.
Yes, and he's saying, I feel also that he's saying not only that, but that I was talking about the finite aspect of living, while he's talking about the quality of living, which is to fulfill yourself, doing something unselfish.
Yes, very true. Very true. You already touch where all this verse is leading to.
Yes.
It's leading to fulfillment. But let's return, actually, to what is being said. So, basically, we have here two main sections. One, he's talking about heaven and earth, and he's saying that they last forever. He's asking why they last forever, because they are unborn. And then he finishes and he moves to another thing, and he expects us to tie the connection between both in our unconscious mind. He doesn't make the connection, but obviously they appear in the same verse. He sees the connection. So first he's talking about heaven and earth. What is the second subject he's talking about?
The sages.
He's talking about a certain quality of being a sage. Either if you are a sage, this is your quality, lack of detachment, or if you detach yourself, you become a sage.
Yes.
It's not clear, but there is a strong connection between a sage, which is a wise man, yes, this is a sage, I would say even illumined man that managed to awaken the higher faculties in him. And he's talking about detachment. The connecting sentence between him talking about heaven and earth and him talking about detachment is a very mysterious sentence. The sage stays behind, thus he is ahead. So obviously he is telling us the way to reach fulfillment is through paradoxes. If you want things to appear in the way you perceive life, and to agree with the way you perceive life, and to sound reasonable, you're not going to come to fulfillment. So it's a very important part here is the paradox as a way of life. And I want to mention here that most of our lives are ruled by science. Science is the religion of the 20th century. Mm-hmm. And whatever scientists say, we salute and we obey because we believe that either they hold the truth and they're not telling us, or they are the pioneers of the truth, and they will come there sooner or later.
Yes.
And the method of the scientist, it must be reasonable. It must obey to logic. If it's not logical, if it's not reasonable, we eject it out of the system. We examine things according to logic. Now, what is logic? Is the way you understand things in your limited mind. The mind is very limited. It can perceive what it can perceive, which is only part of the universe. There are things higher and lower. It's like the spectrum of colors.
Yes.
Do you know how much of the spectrum of colors we can actually perceive?
I guess.
I said it once.
Maybe 10%.
1 to 60.
Oh.
1/60th we perceive. And you can say that the mind of a human being perceives something like that from what is happening. Now, if you want to understand things logically, that means that you are taking the 59%, the 59th portions,
yes,
and cramming them into the 1 of the 60th perception that you have, to explain what you don't know according to what you know.
Okay.
This is what scientists do.
Yes.
You put them as a phenomena which happens. They say, well, I don't understand it, so I don't deal with it, or they explain it according to what they really know.
I know, I understand.
And he's saying, no, if you're not going to accept paradox as a way to break into understanding life, if you are restricted by your logic and reasonability, you will never understand and you will never be fulfilled.
I understand.
And this he is saying, by putting this sentence, the sage stays behind, thus he is ahead. So if you look at it, think about it logically, say, what do you mean? If you stay behind, you are behind. If you are behind, you can't be ahead. You are either ahead or you are behind. How come when you are behind, you are ahead? You're crazy.
Yes. That's totally what I feel, but I want to say that it's not illogical. The sentences themselves are not totally illogical because they often make sense, but in the reverse way. It means that doing the opposite of what you think that will happen will bring you to what you want, where you want to be.
That's what he's saying. He's saying if you do the opposite, then you will get to fulfillment. But this basically causes an explosion in our mind. It's like taking two wires, one positive, one negative, and bringing them together, and
Short circuit.
you get short circuit. Now, unless you train yourself to think through paradox and move through the paradox to higher understanding, you will never get fulfillment. You will never get awakened consciousness. And the only way to do that is to be in the third vector. The third vector is the neutral vector, which is the detached vector. And that's what he is saying. He's saying he stays behind, thus he is ahead. How he is managing to do that? He is detached. So if you are detached, you can do the impossible. You can be a loser, but be the absolute winner. You can be an outsider, but you can actually know the secrets of the universe. And let's see what he might mean when he says, stay behind, thus he is ahead. If you are behind, there are those who are ahead.
Yes.
Behind is always in comparison to something. Where do you find people who are ahead and behind? In a queue. Yeah?
Yes.
A line. There are those who are ahead, they will get there first, they will get the tickets first, they will get the food first.
Yes.
In the road, when there is cars, there's competition. Who's ahead and who's behind.
Yes.
No one wants to be behind.
Yes.
And of course, at work and in any competition, you get 15 football clubs, and there are those who are behind and those who are ahead.
Yes.
Now, here comes the question, and you will see how he's talking about something which is very, very burning issue for most people. See, you have been in a class, school, with another 30 students,
Yes.
35, and all of you have been on the same level. Some of you better students, some of you worse students. But you all knew that it doesn't really matter. The school is basically a hothouse plant. It's actually giving you the conditions in which you can exercise your strengths and your stamina and your self-discipline and all the rest of it, being able to master temptation. Because you see, if a student is last in the class, but 15 years later he is a very famous, very successful construction builder,
Yes.
or have got a very big international factory, it doesn't really matter. And no one will think, yeah, he is a big factory owner, but He didn't study in university. No one speaks about that.
Yes.
The point is to be ahead in the success game. So the question is to you, if you take these 30 students you've been in the class, and I make a list, and I'm saying he's ahead, he's ahead, he's ahead, and you are number 29.
Yes.
What does it make you feel?
Horrible.
Absolutely horrible. So he is actually talking here about something that terrorizes the life of everyone. We all the time compare ourselves to other people and to what we think we should do with our life. I should be more rich. I should be more successful with women.
Yes.
And he has got a nicer house and all the rest of it. And here comes the sentence. The sage stays behind. Thus he is ahead.
He chooses to stay behind?
No, he doesn't say he chooses.
Okay.
It just says a fact. So he's saying like this. You want to be a sage? Stay behind.
I understand.
He stays behind. He gave up the rat race of being in front of people. He is staying behind. And being behind, he is ahead. But he is not ahead in the norms of other people. He is ahead in different things.
I understand.
He is ahead in his own inner life. People are ahead in society achievements, in things which are measurable. He is ahead in something which is not measurable, which is how he lives with himself. What is the state and quality of his soul? What is the relationship between his soul and his mind?
Yes.
Is he alive or just a subject of his emotions? He is ahead.
But
he is full of the fire of life. He's
I-
ahead.
Yes.
And he is only ahead because he stays behind. And this, Jesus said, it's more difficult for a camel to go through an eye of a needle than for a rich man to come to heaven. Because for him to come to heaven, he needs to give up his money. Money can't go to heaven. And rich man can't give up his money.
I understand. So he says the behind and the ahead are talking about different aspects of living. So the only way it makes sense of being behind and being ahead, that the behind is in the game of society and the ahead is in the game of consciousness.
Yes, but he's putting here a condition. The sage stays behind, thus he is ahead.
Okay.
So he's saying, if you are not willing to be a loser, you can't be an awakened human being.
I understand.
You see, I wonder, if you come to all these people that want to go to India and all these places, and they want to dedicate their life, and you said to them, okay, fine, but are you willing to be a loser and everything else? They say, what do you mean? Well, you be a loser with women, you will never have success with women. You will be poor. You will never have a house of your own. People that you know are lower than you in intelligence and inner qualities will have much better life than you. And people will respect them more. And everyone will look at you as someone which is wasting his life. But you would be ahead in your consciousness level. Is it the price you're willing to pay? I think it's a very difficult issue.
Yes.
For people. And basically he's saying here, you can't work two masters.
Yes.
You either belong to the game of life or you are detached from it. Now, he is coming later on, and that's what he's actually saying. He's saying, sage stays behind, thus he's ahead. How he is doing that? Well, he is detached. What does it mean, detached? Indifferent. to become indifferent about what people think of you. For example,
Yes.
I mean, can you imagine that your name is in the newspaper and everyone thinks that you are an arch villain, and people are waiting for you to go out of your home so they can curse you and insult you?
Horrible.
Which is happening almost every day in the newspaper. And people who have been heads of banks, prime ministers, from day to day, people hate them because some dark secret is being exposed. And he is saying, are you able to be detached? See, this is the big test of Job. The
Yes.
devil said, well, let's see, could he be detached?
I never saw the story of Job as a story about it. It always seemed to me as a test of faith. And here you show it in a different perspective, and I think it's a fresh new perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you be not affected by your personal tragedies and still be clear and be open? And let it not affect you in the way that it will not throw you into personal crisis. So your health and your stability is not dependent on your expectations, on your desires, or on the measurement of the success level. See, I must tell you one of the stories that really shook me. I teach body language, but I teach all kind of methods for professional people in communication, basically. And at certain time, I was teaching people who retired from government offices, from state offices, civil servants. And I remember once it was in Jerusalem. Someone was coming. They're coming with couples with his wife. Gentleman must have been 65, something like that, with a cane. He was actually leaning on a cane. And everyone introduced himself, and he said that he suffered a stroke. And then he explained how he suffered a stroke. He said, I was looking ahead for advancement to get a higher position. And I worked day and night to actually show how good I am. And I started to have the symptoms. That, if I remember correctly, I think this is the story. I can't swear on it, but this is what I remember. It was a few years back. And my wife and friends said to me, go to see a doctor. I said, no, I have just to finish this thing because I wanted them to know how good I am. Now he's retired. He's no longer in the job. And half of his body is not functioning. And he sacrificed that because it was more important for him to be ahead. He was doing that because he wasn't indifferent about what happens to him.
I understand. I think it's very hard to be indifferent, and we are manipulated from birth to...
Yes, but it's very strange why people are not detached, because you see, all of us will die. I mean, in the end, nothing matters.
Yes.
It's a bit like writing in the sand, you know. I must say, you know, I walk on the beach and I think all of us see these beautiful castles that people build. And I think, what's the point? The waves will come and wash it off. What's the point of writing on the sand and building castles? This is our life.
Yes.
Nothing matters in the end. Of course, you can give yourself the stories of reincarnation, which no one checked and no one knows. Yes? And then you can say everything matters. But if you take death as a fact, you must be detached.
I understand.
I remember this saying once someone told me many years ago in the army: don't take life seriously. In any event, you won't get alive out of it. So in front of this, the most reasonable thing is to be detached. And the one thing that couldn't be said about any of us, we are too much identifying with our suffering from one end and from our happiness on another hand. We are ruled by two very cruel dictators. So he's saying, he is detached, the sage, thus at one with all.
Oh.
So for us to be detached, not to care what happens to you, not to be insulted when someone insults you, not to be in a crisis when the woman you love hates you, not to sink in deep depression when your child dies. What kind of person are you? You're a machine. You're not a human. He's saying, sorry. You must be detached, otherwise you won't be a sage. And if you will be detached, you'll be one with all. What does that mean, one with all? So people who identify are separated from all. They are locked within their own personality prison. They are not part of the flow. They are not part of the family of the living. They are locked within their own personal ambition for gain and fear from loss. Life goes on and they are not part of it.
What you're saying is totally opposite of what goes on, because if you take two people at work and one person is doing his job and doesn't show it all, and the other person is showing high emotions about it and being involved, but does less work, they would say that the first one is more important because he is...
See, I don't think it's the right interpretation, because you're saying if you are detached, then you will work less hard.
Okay.
It's not what he's saying. See the second sentence. He's saying, he is detached, thus at one with all. Now comes the following sentence. Through selfless action, he attains fulfillment. So he doesn't say don't act. He's saying act with selflessness. So if you are at work, put everything you've got in it, but don't identify with what you do. Do it without you being in it. See, I wrote a book called The Art of Conversation in Hebrew. And I'm saying there are certain levels to conversation. In the beginning, you try to move the conversation. Then you try to force the conversation. Then you act the conversation. But real conversation happens when you give up and you allow the conversation to act through you.
I understand.
We need to become female, because if a woman will try to give birth, she couldn't. She needs to give up her own identification and let the child come through her.
Mm-hmm.
She should be not involved. The most difficult thing for us is not to be involved. So he's saying we need to do actions, but to do it without effort, without pushing, without wanting something in it, without the anxiety whether it will come out good or not. To do without you being in what you do.
Wow.
This is the selfless action. And so he's saying through selfless action he attains fulfillment. So this is the top.
I think
He is starting with saying the sage gives up the competition of life. He willingly stays behind. which allows him to pay attention to his inner life. How he is doing that? He's indifferent about his success or failure. And because of that, he is part of life. Life speaks to him. Life includes him. And because he is detached, his actions are without his ego. And when his actions are without ego, he attains fulfillment. In other words, consciousness awakening and enlightenment.
I think that the last thing I want to ask you...
Hang on, I didn't finish yet.
Okay, sorry.
Because what is left behind is the first sentence. I want to tie it into the flow.
Okay.
Because till now I basically opened up only the second half of this verse, which is the sage stays behind, thus he is ahead. He is detached, thus at one with all. Through selfless action, he attains fulfillment. The first sentence is, heaven and earth last forever. Why do heaven and earth last forever? They are unborn. Now the question is, what does this sentence has to do with the second one? Because he's talking about the universe, the macrocosmos, and then he's talking about the microcosmos.
Well, maybe he's saying that the compensation for dying is having fulfillment.
Compensation for dying is having fulfillment. You see, you are still looking for compensation for dying.
Yes.
He is not there at all. So this verse is built as two-level parallel analogies. He's building the first layer, which is heaven and earth last forever, and they last forever because they are unborn, and because they are unborn, they are forever living. So I do a parallel between heaven and earth are living forever because they are unborn. This is parallel to the sage stays behind, thus he is ahead. So there's a contradiction between the fact that heaven and earth last forever because they are unborn. How can something which is unborn be at all? And what is the connection between lasting forever without being born? And this is parallel to being behind, you are ahead. And there is a parallel between they are unborn, so they are living. The parallel is through selfless action, he attains fulfillment. Now this is how I explain this. The universe is existing by existence. It's pure entity. And when you talk about isness, something which is, it is because it is. It's complete within itself. It's not comprehended by human mind, because we only comprehend limited things. Things which has got a beginning and end, because our mind is limited. But you see, it's only a question of perception, because the cell in our body must perceive our mind as endless. But if it wants to perceive our mind, it will perceive our mind according to the limitation of the cell.
Okay.
So, for us human beings, the universe is endless. We only understand things through action, being born and finished. And if a person gives up his perception of something being born and something being died, he can connect to the endlessness of the universe, to the flow, to the infinity power of the universe, which means we shouldn't put upon something higher than ask the condition of action. Because in action you must start something, you must finish something. With the ontological level of life, things are because they are. Now the sage needs to come to that level of life. To be not because what he does, not because his identification, but his pure existence. Now if he is one with himself by being, not by doing, not by consuming, then he is actually becoming endless entity.
At one with all.
At one with all, and there is a parallel between fulfillment and forever living.
I understand.
And this, in a way, answers your pondering about the fact, what about us human beings?
Yes.
He's saying the most we can do about having eternal life is having fulfillment of our faculties by detaching ourselves from the wish of gain and loss. So he's saying, if you give up wanting to be a winner in the human life, you can get a much higher prize in the real life.
Yes.
You will be part of something which is forever.
I understand. So
he is not saying that, but by putting two parallel lines between the universe and the human being, if you do self-fulfillment, then you become part of something which never is born, never dying, thus lasts forever. There's something eternal in a person who experiences and goes through self-fulfillment.
So it's, maybe in summary I can say that connecting to the universe and to the oneness of all by detaching from yourself.
Well, I couldn't say that with that much confidence.
Okay.
I would be more careful. I wouldn't say no, but I would be more careful. I wouldn't say that by having self-fulfillment you connect to the eternal universe. That this is what you said, right?
Yes.
I would say if you go through self-fulfillment, for you it is like the universe being eternal.
Yes.
You achieve something which has got an eternal quality in you. When you become fulfilled, you are beyond life and death. When you manage to transcend the level of action and connect to the level of be, and be without being detached, then you are like the universe which is never born. He's saying like. He is not saying you are going to be.
Yes.
You are like, because he's putting it in a parallel.
Yes.
So it is a bit like the snake who is biting his own tail. He's starting with the universe, goes to the human, ends with the self-fulfillment, but there is a parallel between the self-fulfillment and the eternal universe.
I understand.
One reflects the other. He's saying the highest quality of the universe, that it's never born, never dies, the highest quality of the human being is fulfillment, and the fulfillment reflects the eternal universe.
So would you say that this poem or this verse is bound to set you free from life and death?
You see, you are again pushing to that.
Yes.
He is not saying that. He is saying self-fulfillment is the equivalent on the human level of what it is for the universe to be eternal.
I understand.
You don't. It's very difficult to understand that. But the highest level for the human being to be, which equals for the universe being eternal, is to experience self-fulfillment. If there's anything we can draw out of this, that self-fulfillment for the human being is a very, very high achievement indeed, and it's parallel to heaven and earth being unborn and never dying. So he's not solving the riddle of the limitation of life, but he's giving you something which he's saying to you is equivalent for the wish to have an eternal life. Okay, so I will read that verse again, and then when I read it, if you put any more questions or remarks. Heaven and earth last forever. Why do heaven and earth last forever? They are unborn, so ever living. The sage stays behind, thus he is ahead. He is detached, thus at one with all. Through selfless action, he attains fulfillment. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.